glasses match too. You just all coordinated.
It's part of the aesthetics of the show.
Aesthetics, yes.
Yeah, the show needs aesthetics.
Aesthetics, absolutely.
I am so excited to be sitting with the Reverend Lacette Cross. And if you haven't checked out who she is, that means you haven't visited my Instagram, Facebook page, go ahead and do that, where she has already introduced herself. And we're going to pop right into it because we have so much to talk about in such a limited time. So let's get into it. Theology Talks You Like or Not.
TTYL.
To Theology Talk You Like or Not. I am your creator, curator, investigator, sometime instigator, but definitely a liberator, Rev to say. And for a few moments of your sacred time in this sacred space, I invite you to tune in as we talk good, talk back, talk loud, talk smack, talk life and love, talk true, talk music, talk art. Talk faith, hope, peace, joy, talk justice, talk God. Let's talk. Reverend L, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am well. Thank you for being a part of our first episode, TTYL or Not. And in this incredible season of just learning about God and how what's going on with religion, with the church, I was moved by the Reverend Geneva Canon, the womanist theologian. May she rest in power, and her work. And the quote that actually led me to this particular work is doing the work that my soul must have. And in researching you, and we were friends. We met through Facebook.
We did.
We were friends, Facebook friends for years. Through Pink Robe Chronicle, shout out to Melva Sampson, and we finally met in person this year
in June
at the Mystic Soul Conference.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about your connection as a mentee of Reverend Geneva Canon and the work that you do, and what has brought you to this work.
She was phenomenal. I mean, I think if you ever had a chance to sit in a classroom with her, you saw her brilliance. If you ran into her at a conference or at a luncheon, you saw her humanity. She was just this solid black woman who loved people. And so I remember my first time meeting her. I was so hesitant and shy, and she was just like, come on, like, what you want to do? Set a meeting in my, set a meeting for us to meet in my office. And she answered her own phones. I mean, she's really just a down-to-earth kind of person. And my journey with her, really, I account to who I am today. I mean, beyond just the wisdom of, like, do the work your soul must have.
Yes.
She was one of my chief, I would say, cheerleaders around take what you already know and dig deeper, right? Like, genius is going deeper and not wider, right? And so in my time and being able to study with her, and I did a degree with her, a Master's of Theology, a THM, she required writing every week. She required, like, your reading and your writing. And one of the quotes that I try to live by is to read and write even when the lights are out. Woo. So we are called to do this work, and most oftentimes she would say in her classes, listen, as black women in the academy, as womanists, we not only had to know the black men, then we had to know the white women, then we got to know the white men, right? Because you can't get a PhD in the Western Hemisphere without knowing dead white men, right? So you have all of these layers of who you need to know before you even get to the beautiful canon, right. Of womanist theology, womanist thinking at all. So she never let me slack. She always called me her spoiled child because I was always discovering ways to try to get around work. But ultimately, I am fully about sexuality and spirituality because of her and her encouragement to do this work, right? Not only because it's the work my soul must have, but it's also because sexuality is the number one killer of people, right? Issues and matters of sexuality. Sexuality is the number one thing that people kill themselves and or others around.
Yes.
We think about the time that we're living in, where even now we're somewhere near 18 to 20 Black trans women having been killed this year alone, right? And those are only the national statistics. I don't even know what the international statistics are.
Right.
So when she would say that sexuality kills, right, it is also this understanding of like killing our spirit. It is not just like, yes, it definitely kills, right? It is removing people from this earth, from suicide, right? From people murdering other people.
Right.
From the slow death of not being your full authentic self.
Yeah.
Which happens to many of us, right? Every single day. So her pushing to not only read and write when the lights are out, but to debunk, unmask, and disentangle these conservative, sex-negative theologies that we have been passed down and inherited in this world. But she and I would just talk about those things. And not only that, she would really encourage me to keep doing the community-based work. So when I started Will You Be Whole, she was a strong encourager of like, what does it mean if Black women really were whole? Right? What would the world really look like if Black women, straight women, queer women, curious women, trans women, like really understood our full wholeness?
Right.
And
the power we would
and
hold.
and the power we would hold, right? And the grounding of that. And she was also a comedian, so she always had a joke ready and available. So I think I learned immeasurably from her and from being able to humbly say that I was a mentee of hers. I'll never forget an email exchange when Kendrick Lamar did one of them music awards, and he had the scene up there with the prison bar.
Yes,
right?
I remember that.
Yes.
So what was it about that?
So she was like trying to understand, she's at that generation, so she was trying to understand a little bit about that. And I said, you need to see this, Dr. Cannon. Like, you need to just watch this and see the ways in which he's telling the story, right? The ways in which he is really exposing our understandings, from my opinion anyway, of Blackness, right? Yes. And of really countering some cultural norms about who we are as Black people and the heritage. And she watched it and she was just like, that was phenomenal. And we just, had this engaging back and forth emails that I have kept in my, in my own email as sacred and as a reminder of how she was always reading and writing when the lights were out, but how she was also interested in what was going on in the world.
Right.
As a way of learning, but also as a way of always connecting that to the arc of liberation, right? That she was always about pushing us to debunk, unmask, and disentangle, right? These theologies that hold up all of the isms in the world.
Yeah.
And she would teach in her ethics classes about, you do not have systems of oppression without a strong theological foundation.
Yeah.
Right? So racism is upheld, sexism is upheld, white supremacist capitalism is upheld.
Because of our theology.
Because of our theology.
And what is theology? How do you understand it?
Right. I mean, when I teach about theology or spirituality, theology is talking about God. How do you understand God? And when people ask me, well, what do you mean by God, or what do you mean by spirituality? And I specifically say that it is about the pursuit of seeking that which is greater than yourself, right? And for those of us who are Christian or who are formed in a Christian society, that entity is God.
Yes.
For those of us that may be more interfaith in our understanding, or we are agnostic or maybe even atheist, those words can be universe or divine or even ancestors. I think when you consider theology as an academic enterprise, it is the study of God and understanding who God is. I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version.
Yes,
I think,
of course.
You know, I mean, I am a firm believer of that too. I grew up in a fundamentalist, conservative type of biblical literist church setting who just espoused this idea that God calls you to do ministry in the world at the point of your pain, right? That you are called to do this work because it's something that you're struggling with or you're wrestling with. Or that's something hard that you've gone through that God wants you to tell others about. And so I think as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, that has always been a part of what does it mean to be a free sexual person, right? A black woman with my own sense of my own sexuality. That was initially kind of where I began in my 20s around what does it mean to enjoy sex, to enjoy it in a healthy way, right? And then I wanted to be the black Dr. Ruth. So I thought, I'm going to be the sex therapist and all this kind of things. And that didn't really jive with the biblical teaching I was being brought up with. And
with the church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. The church. And then, God has a sense of humor, and I came into my woman-loving self at 30. And that threw me for this whole other loop of like, am I going to hell? I'm not, I love this woman that I'm with right now. Does that make me a lesbian? What does it mean to be a lesbian? Like, now can I really go to hell? And so my kind of height of that moment of wrestling was I was a youth minister and I was asked to preach, and I was like, I threw the fleece on the ground. For some of y'all watching, y'all know the story in the Bible where the man throws the fleece on the ground and he's like, if it's wet, blah blah blah. So I'm like, listen, God, if you really are okay with me loving this woman, right, physically, emotionally, sexually loving this woman, and you still call me to do this work, then you're going to make my preaching bad, right? You're going to make it like it's going to be a flop, like they're going to run me out the church.
Right.
Fast forward, preached, in common day language, slayed, which really just meant, for me, it just meant I preached, people responded to the word that went forth, the altar call was open, I was led to share my abortion story, and that opened up, a whole nother opportunity for people to do their own healing, spiritual healing at the altar. And after that, it was clear, like God was like, you good, I'm good, let's do what I've called you to do. And so I think ever since that point, I have been studying and reading and wrestling, and during my seminary journey, because I didn't go back to school till I was 30, and seminary when I was in my mid-30s, and I did all of my papers, all of my projects had some thread of sexuality in it, so everything that I focused on was about sexuality in the black church. How are we doing curriculums? How are we dissecting or analyzing our theologies around us? What do our bodies look like? I did HIV/AIDS ministry. I mean, like, really just getting into sexuality,
doing
right?
The work,
doing the work, and I think being a part of a church, Covenant Baptist United Church of Christ, where the pastors were Dennis and Christine Wiley. They are now retired, and I'm a daughter of Covenant, and they were the first black straight couple that pastored an LGBTQ affirming church. They stood up for marriage equality when it was in DC, and then led the efforts to pass it nationally. And so I sat in a church that lost members. I sat in a faith community that wrestled with what is God calling us to do around supporting and affirming LGBTQ folks, right? And knowing that even in my sense of like loving this woman at that time, I had no sense that I was really a lesbian. I don't think I'm a lesbian, but I knew I loved this woman, and have since have come to discover myself as bisexual, and use that very, very out and very proud about that identity, because I think representation matters. And so my life has been about my own healing, reconciling journey of like, what does it mean to love God and love sex too? And know that means more than just the physical act of sex, though everybody needs a good orgasm, so find you a good orgasm with a healthy person or a good toy. We call out God for a reason. So
she said it.
I think that be healthy about it, be responsible about it, but I believe in some good sex in our lives. I think it is the one thing that clears our minds and it opens our hearts and spirits, which is why we do need to be responsible with it. But because that has been my life's pursuit, that also has meant that I've had to do my own healing, right? And I have to do my own reconciling. And when I started Will You Be Whole in 2015, it was about, I was 40 and I was like, listen, this is the time. We Black women deserve a space to talk about this, deserve a space to interrogate this religion, this theology that's been passed down to us. And it was also during that time where I was still, I was learning with and from Dr. Canon. I was, coming out of seminary. I was figuring out, how do you be ordained minister, in the church? How do you do this work and still find some way of not feeling like you're always ostracized, always on the margins. And so God has made a way. I mean, I'm good. I love the work that I get to do in the world and have come to finally accept that it's not meant for everybody, and it's okay.
Something that you shared made me think about like my own personal journey now, where I was maybe a couple of years ago, maybe 10 years ago in my 20s. I had taken a vow of celibacy mainly because the church was like, no premarital sex, and my vows of celibacy for me, I couldn't be in a relationship, and what it meant to like, I still want like intimacy, I still want partnership, but to commit to my vow was to not be in a relationship at all. Fast forward, currently I have also taken a vow of celibacy, mainly and for very different reasons, mainly for my own healing. And so back then it wasn't like for him, it was just like to commit to the church and like, okay, because this is what I need to do in order for me to get that mate, in order, that man, in order to live a godly life. And now it's like, no, because I really need to heal and I really need to get connected to my body. Hence, my yoga practice have gone to a different level. Meditation, and just like I can say for the first time in my life at 30 something years old that I know my body. I know what feels good. I know what I desire, and I know what I don't desire. And so continue to connect with myself in this period of celibacy has just been so profound. And so when you said that just made me want to kind of share that experience, but also want to hear from you. What are some of the practices for you that grounds you and that reconnects you to yourself and the work? Because I think sometimes the work can be tiring. Because I heard you say it's not for everybody. And then there are the people, especially those that we are most closest to, our families, our friends, who think they know, and we come into our own and knowing God for ourselves. And what is the thing that grounds you, to reconnect you to yourself, to reconnect you to others, but most importantly, like reconnect you to the divine?
Lately, it has been guided meditations, which, and I'm saying this for myself and for some of the viewers that may be watching who grew up in the kind of setting I grew up in, which conservative, biblical literist, right? Who anything that didn't relate to Christianity was like, you going to hell. So anything around meditation had to be tied to Christian meditation, right? Any Eastern religion or any forms of practices that connected to the divine were not holy and right. And so guided meditations have been the way. And even if I don't use guided meditations, deep breathing, watching the sunset, right? Moments in nature. And I'm not saying like I go and I drive off into a forest and I'm hiking, right? I'm not at that level. But there's a park in my city. RVA, Richmond, Virginia. Hey. Anyway,
What's up,
there's a park in my city that sits high, and it overlooks the river, and the sunsets there are just beautiful, and I can do some deep breathing and some of that. The other way that I've finally have come to connect with the divine around is reading the text in a different way. Like,
I'm having a hard time coming back to the Bible.
I know. I'm not. Yes.
Help me. I know this is TTYL.
That's right.
I'm having my theology. Well, let me say this. My sacred text these days is really reading from. I'm reading from poets who speak of God and God's likeness and their own experience. But I'm having a hard time coming back to the Bible. But go ahead.
No, I think that's real. I think that's part of the journey. I wasn't always there, right? I find joy and connection to like interrogating the text. So it's just me and God, and me being able to be like, God, this can't be right. Like what was up with Paul? Like, I mean, this is the kind of conversation I'm now having,
right,
which now allows me to connect to God and the divine differently, because as a pastor, I get to then model and open that up for others. So that has been my practice, new. When I say new, like within the past 6 months or so.
Okay.
So it is, very recent, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think connecting to the divine also directly relates to how you describe the divine. Who is the divine to you? Who is God to you? How do you understand God? And not your mama nam's God, not your grandmama nam's God. Your God, like you, God, he, she, they, it, universe, whatever, right? And so I am today at a place where God is so expansive that God can't be pinned down by one pronoun. Right. And God can't be pinned down by one manifestation of God.
Right.
So when I talk about God, I do mean the divine, the ancestors, the universe, spirit. Like because God is so much greater. And so I have come to that place to say, well, if God is that much greater, then my practices can be greater than what I've been socialized to believe. Sure. So that means that I can watch the sunset and experience that, right?
That's right.
I can be able to do guided meditations or learn mindfulness or learn from other religious practices that are good practices. Like the Catholics got some amazing contemplative practices that we can benefit from. And I think once we give ourselves permission to reconstruct our sense of God and our sense of spirituality, then we open up theology so much greater. But we have to give ourselves permission. Or we have to look to a trusted person to give us permission. So I, as a pastor, give you permission to reconstruct your spiritual life. That's what it's about.
Yes.
You need to be able to do that. And so that you can then understand theology more expansively.
Okay. What is the fear? What is the greatest fear do you think people have, especially those within the Black church, within the Protestant church, have with wrestling with God? Because I believe, for me, I have grown and come to know God for myself in the wrestle.
When an individual lives in a world constructed around anti-Blackness, that means that most things are an illusion. That we are often seeking to find something that is concrete, something that is permanent, something that we can hold on to in this world. That justice is elusive from us, right? True freedom is elusive from us. Like things like health and economics, right? Like economic stability, these things are fleeting. We reach for them and they are not there for us. And so therefore, what is the one thing that we can say or try to construct as concrete? And that is God.
Yeah.
That is the practices of the church, right?
Yeah.
That is the doctrine of the church. That is, this is how you should be. This is how you should act. This is how you should live. And to not do these things then means X, right? Or then means Y. I think because of our lived experience, have so much instability in the world that our spiritual life has to have some rigidity. And I don't know if that's for certain, because similar to you, I have found greater joy and greater liberation in the wrestle, on the margins, in the gray area with God, than I ever did trying to follow the pious checkpoints of the church.
Yes.
And specifically the black church, right? And the ways in which respectability politics and the ways in which strict literal interpretations of the text have been passed down to us. And those of us who are assigned female at birth persons, right? That relate to our sexuality, right? That relate to our very bodies. Like, I remember being policed by other women because I have breasts and I didn't.
And the fullness thereof.
And the fullness thereof. I can't hide this. I mean, even if you put a potato sack on me, it's there. I mean, and that's not take that up with the Creator. Like, right. I didn't do this.
Right.
I just showed up.
Right.
And now you're policing me, or you're telling me that which God said was good is not good. Mm. So now I gotta wrestle with that, and then I gotta figure out, how do I live this perfect pious life? Right? How do I live this life so that I can make sure I get the right man, to then have the right number of babies, to then have the right family, and be unhappy? I ain't got time. I can't.
We ain't got time.
And I'm not sure God is pleased with it. I'm not sure. I don't know the mind of God. I'm not confessing or professing to know the mind of God. I'm unsure that when I think about Jesus and the walk of Jesus' life, that Jesus won't necessarily concerned about some of those. I don't know. And my issues about Paul, anyway, that's a whole nother, Paul was a struggling gay man, and he didn't even know how to wrestle with this thing.
Well, let's just jump right into it then.
And then we use that as, we're really Paulinians and not Christians, or most of.
I'll be saying that, Reverend. I'm always saying that. I'm like, Christ wasn't a Christian. He was a Jew.
He was.
Okay. And Paul had some heartbreaks, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
The beloved Paul and his heartbreak.
Yes.
And this is how he moralized Christ.
Yes, exactly.
Listen, this is another conversation for another day.
Yes, it is. But it relates to theology, because you have to have an expansive theological lens to be able to look at the text broader.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And this idea of liberation, how do you liberate the text, and how do you liberate your understanding of a biblical text that was written thousands of years ago without you in mind, without this context, without this understanding.
Without this culture. There's a whole different culture, a whole different language that has been repeatedly translated and interpreted. And what we have now is just another translated for this modern day context for us to keep us in systems. Mm-hmm. Listen, I am excited about this conversation, but we got to get into pop culture. We got to get into it.
Get into it.
In pop culture, so most recently, Benny Hinn, Benny Hinn. The Reverend Benny Hinn has basically repented, as you know, many of these ministers profited off of their parishioners, their members, with this prosperity gospel. And most recently, there has been this YouTube or video that has gone viral where he basically says, I repent for, the years, a couple of years ago, I guess he's been wrestling with it, for the years when I like to say laundering money.
So it's all about our brokenness, our old man. We call that the flesh. Must be broken, must be out of the way. And today, sadly, among a lot of circles, all you hear is how to build the flesh. It's a feel-good message. That's what you hear out there. It's all about feel good, do good, all that. Make money, all the rest of it. And I'm sorry to say that prosperity has gone a little crazy. And I'm correcting my own theology, and you need to all know it. Because when I read the Bible now, I don't see the Bible in the same eyes I saw the Bible 20 years ago.
Thoughts on that?
Wow. I mean, I think, the interesting thing about our mortality and about when we get older, right? And we either amass a certain amount of wealth or achieve a level of success that we individually deem as like our own pinnacle, that we then have a sense of a greater opportunity, a greater openness towards risk, right? So what is the risk that Benny Hinn took? I mean, come on, like, boo, you about to croak. I mean, I'm just like, you are at this, like, you're honestly, you're at a point where you're not relevant as much anymore, right? Because God rest her soul, my grandmother has passed, right? And her generation of folks, I don't know too many people in my generation that are still even watching him, right? First of all, because cable is expensive and he only on the cable stations, but whatever. And, right, the reality is like, okay, what does he lose by this repentance?
Nothing.
Not a doggone thing. Because as I was reading about that or watching that, there was another video that he got interviewed on by a younger evangelist who looked to be a millennial, right? And who is Latinx based by his name. And so there's this very interesting phenomenal statistics around the role of evangelicalism within what we are calling the rising majority, electorate majority or whatever, like Latinx. Like the Latinx community is large, and like the rise of evangelicalism within that community is statistically proving itself to be high. So what does it mean for this guy who's been, dare I say, pilfering off of poor Black and POC folks for decades to now come towards the end of his ministry, to now repent, right? But still capitalize on the moment by going and interviewing with this young Latinx evangelist, because you want to meet a whole new, so you want to try to reach a whole new. So is your repentance real? I mean, I can't judge a person's heart.